I still remember the first time I looked up and truly felt the sky calling me. As a child growing up in Kiev, my world was a patchwork of bustling streets, quiet evenings, and the distant roar of planes overhead. My father, an engineer, and my mother, a teacher, instilled in me a love for knowledge and discipline, but it was the air itself that captured my imagination. I spent hours staring at the skies, imagining myself soaring above the city, the wind rushing past, and the hum of engines under my control. Every model plane I built, every flight simulator I tinkered with, was a rehearsal for the life I dreamed of. By the age of 27, that dream had matured into something far greater than mere fascination. When the clouds of war began to gather over Ukraine, I realized that flying was no longer just a childhood fantasy, it was a responsibility. The sky that had always felt like freedom now carried the weight of my country's hopes. I I needed to protect it. The thought of my family, my friends, and the countless civilians who relied on those who dared to take to the air filled me with a determination I had never known. And so when the call came, I did not hesitate. Every lesson learned, every skill honed in training became a tool, not for glory, but for survival. This was no longer a game of imagination. This was reality. And it was my duty to answer. By early 2022, Kiev was a city suspended between routine and uncertainty. The streets that once echoed with the laughter of children and the chatter of cafe patrons now felt tense, as if every pedestrian sensed the storm on the horizon. News broadcasts and emergency alerts had become part of our daily rhythm, a constant reminder that the world I had known was shifting beneath our feet. The distant hum of military aircraft and the occasional rumble of artillery could no longer be ignored. The threat was real, immediate, and dangerously close. The outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict transformed everything overnight. Strategic targets across the city were under threat, and our airspace, once a symbol of freedom, had become a battlefield. Radar stations lit up with blips of approaching aircraft, and air defense units were on high alert around the clock. Civilian life was interrupted. Schools and businesses closed, shelters became essential, and families huddled together in fear while soldiers scrambled to respond. For us pilots, the stakes were enormous. The responsibility was no longer abstract. It was tangible and unforgiving. Each sortie had to be precise, every decision split second. The lives of those below our families, neighbors, and countless innocents depended on our skill and courage. The air, once a playground for my childhood imagination, had become both a weapon and a sanctuary. We were the first line of defense tasked with protecting the city from threats that could arrive without warning at any hour of the day or night. And so as the sun rose over Kiev each morning, painting the skyline in shades of gold and gray, I knew that my role as a pilot carried weight far beyond personal ambition. The war was no longer a distant headline. It had become my reality. Every flight, every maneuver was a step into uncertainty, and I had to prepare myself, mind and body, for the trials that awaited in the skies above. I knew from the moment I strapped into the cockpit that flying in wartime was nothing like the simulations or dreams of my youth. The sky that had once felt endless and forgiving was now a theater of danger, uncertainty, and unforgiving physics. Every mission carried a weight beyond myself. Every decision could mean life or death, not only for me, but for countless civilians below. The first and most glaring challenge was survival. The probability of returning from a high-altitude interception or a dogfight against a skilled adversary was far from certain. I had read statistics, memorized tactics, and trained endlessly, but no amount of preparation could fully shield you from a missile streaking across the sky or the sudden appearance of enemy aircraft where you least expect it. The thought of being hunted while airborne, exposed, and vulnerable was a constant shadow over every pre-flight checklist. Then there was the psychological burden. Responsibility pressed down on me like the weight of the plane itself. Every civilian in Kiev, every friend, every stranger depended on the protection that I and my fellow pilots could provide. A single mistake could ripple into tragedy, a failure measured not in scores or missions completed, but in human lives lost. Anxiety and adrenaline merged into a strange companion that would cling to me for the months to come. Physical endurance was no small matter either. Maneuvering a high-performance fighter in extreme weather with engines screaming and wind currents lashing against the fuselage demanded both precision and stamina. Nights spent patrolling under heavy clouds, days racing against the sun to intercept threats, left no room for error or fatigue. My body would strain, my hands would ache, and yet I had to remain alert, anticipating every movement, calculating every turn, trusting both training and instinct. The first sortie of the campaign, Guardian of the Sky, loomed on the horizon. I could feel the tension in my chest tighten with every passing moment. Ahead lay the unknown, the roar of engines, the smell of burning fuel, the flashing threat of weapons. And as I prepared to take off, I understood that this was not a game. This was war, and the sky would be our crucible. The orders came down from command, with a clarity that left no room for doubt: protect the skies over Kiev at all costs. The campaign was codenamed Guardian of the Sky, and its purpose was simple in words but formidable in execution: ensure that no hostile aircraft could breach the city's airspace, intercept every incursion, and safeguard the civilians below. But as simple as it sounded, the reality was far more complex, and the responsibility felt almost unbearable. Each sortie demanded precise coordination with radar operators, anti-aircraft units, and fellow pilots. Flight plans were meticulously charted, but in the moment we had to rely on instinct as much as strategy. The tension among the squadron was palpable. We all knew the stakes, yet we had to mask fear with focus. The slightest hesitation, a single misjudgment, could spell disaster for the people we were sworn to protect. The night before my first mission, I walked along the tarmac, staring at the row of fighter jets gleaming under the dim lights. The engines seemed to hum in anticipation, a mechanical heartbeat of the city's defense. I tightened my gloves, adjusted my helmet, and took a deep breath. Every memory of childhood dreams, every hour spent in simulators, every lesson from my instructors coalesced into that moment. Tomorrow, the sky would no longer be a playground, it would be the battlefield. As I climbed into the cockpit, the metal frame of the aircraft pressing around me, I felt a mixture of fear and resolve. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the city. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the first test of everything I had trained for. The campaign had begun and I was ready, or at least I hoped I was. The sky awaited, and with it, the crucible of war. The first time I stepped onto the tarmac of the military base, the sheer size of the aircraft left me momentarily breathless. Rows of fighters gleamed under the overcast sky, their metal bodies reflecting the gray morning light. I could feel the hum of engines beneath the soles of my boots, a silent promise of speed and power and danger. The reality hit me hard. This was no longer a childhood dream. This was preparation for life and death in the skies above my home. Our days began before dawn, each one a relentless series of drills designed to test endurance, skill, and nerves. The simulators became my new reality, a virtual battlefield where split-second decisions determined victory or annihilation. We practiced takeoffs and landings in zero visibility, navigated stormy skies, and executed evasive maneuvers to dodge virtual missiles. The instructors drilled into us the importance of anticipation, reading the skies, and trusting both our instincts and our instruments. Every error was cataloged, every hesitation noted, because an actual combat mistakes could not be erased. The dogfighting exercises were the true test. I found myself chasing, weaving, and spiraling alongside my instructors, feeling the strain of G-forces pressing against my chest, the strain of my muscles tightening with every sharp turn. The adrenaline was addictive and terrifying in equal measure. I could sense the other pilots around me, their faces masks of concentration, yet behind their eyes I glimpsed the same fear and determination that coursed through me. Beyond the physical training, there was a mental education. We studied enemy aircraft capabilities, learned to predict maneuvers, and memorized engagement protocols. I realized that flying a fighter was as much a game of chess as a test of reflexes. We were not just learning to pilot machines. We were learning to anticipate life-threatening scenarios, to make decisions that could save or end lives in seconds. By the end of each day, exhaustion was a constant companion. My body ached from the strain, my mind buzzed with calculations and maneuvers, yet a deep sense of purpose anchored me. Every hour spent in simulators, every maneuver practiced in the skies, every lesson absorbed in briefings was preparation for the unknown. This training was not about glory, it was about survival responsibility and the stark reality that the first mission could very well determine the course of a life in the air. The evening before my first deployment, I returned home to my family's modest apartment in Kiev. The streets were quieter than usual, the city holding its breath, as if sensing the storm that had already begun. I carried my flight bag heavier than it should have been, though not with equipment, rather it felt loaded with the weight of what was about to come. My mother's eyes were glistening, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted my jacket, and my father, normally so composed, had an edge of worry I had never seen before. My younger sister clung to my arm, her small hands making me acutely aware of how fragile life could be. We sat together for a long, silent dinner. Words seemed inadequate, incapable of conveying the mixture of pride, fear, and helplessness that swirled between us. I tried to reassure them with smiles and stories of my training, but I could see through the thin veil of my own confidence. They were afraid, and so was I, though I would not let it show. Every hug felt like a potential last embrace, each glance a silent plea for safety. I memorized the details of their faces, the curve of my mother's smile, the steady gaze of my father, my sister's playful frown, knowing that the memories might have to carry me through whatever lay ahead. Before leaving, I handed them a folded letter I had written in the quiet hours earlier that day. In it, I promised to do everything in my power to return safely, to protect the skies above our city, and to remember their love in every decision I made. My father grasped my shoulder firmly, offering words of encouragement mixed with warning. Stay sharp, trust your instincts, and come back to us. My mother's embrace lingered longer than expected, her whisper steady but fragile. Remember who you are. Remember why you fight. The walk to the airbase that night was surreal. The city lights flickered like distant stars, and I felt the enormity of the responsibility pressing against me. I was leaving the safety of home for a sky that could no longer be taken for granted. Every step toward the tarmac, every thought of the missions ahead, reminded me that childhood dreams had transformed into a duty far heavier than any of us could have imagined. And yet in that mixture of fear and resolve, I found a quiet determination to honor my family, my city, and the promise I had made to myself to survive, to protect, and to fly. Dawn broke over Kiev, painting the city in pale gold and gray. I climbed into the cockpit, the familiar weight of the flight suit and helmet settling around me. My hands gripping the controls trembled slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. The engines roared to life beneath me, a mechanical heartbeat syncing with the pounding of my chest. Today, the sky was no longer a dream or a training simulation, it was a battlefield. The mission briefing had been precise: intercept any hostile aircraft approaching the northern sector of the city coordinate with radar operators and protect the civilians below at all costs. Simple in theory, terrifying in execution. As we taxied toward the runway, I caught sight of my squadron, 5 other pilots, each with the same mixture of determination and anxiety etched across their faces. We exchanged nods, silent promises that we would watch each other's backs. Takeoff was immediate and jarring. The jet accelerated faster than anything I had experienced in training, lifting into the crisp morning air. The city receded below me, a patchwork of rooftops, streets, and parks, all now vulnerable. The radio crackled with updates from command radar blips popping up on our screens. I tightened my grip eyes, scanning the horizon. The first contact came suddenly. 2 enemy aircraft had been detected, approaching from the northwest. My adrenaline spiked. The reality of what I had trained for surged through every fiber of my being. The dogfight began almost instinctively. I rolled and weaved the G-forces, pressing me into my seat, my mind hyper-focused on every maneuver, every calculation. My squadron moved in tight formation, calling out positions, warning each other of threats. I tracked one of the intruders as it dipped and turned, predicting its moves, recalling every lesson from the simulator. My fingers danced over the controls, executing maneuvers I had repeated countless times in training, but now with lives, not just my own, hanging in the balance. Minutes stretched like hours. I felt my heart hammering, sweat dampening my gloves, the roar of engines and distant explosions merging into a deafening symphony of war. Then a successful interception. The enemy veered away, unable to penetrate our defenses. Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. The mission was not over. The sky was vast, and threats could emerge at any moment. As we returned to base, the adrenaline gradually ebbed, leaving a residue of exhaustion and awe. I had survived my first sortie. The city below seemed unchanged, serene even, but I knew the peace was fragile. The sky had tested me today, and I had passed, but barely. Every lesson, every training exercise, every ounce of preparation had been validated in those tense minutes above Kiev. Yet deep down, I understood that this was only the beginning. The real challenges of war awaited, and I had to be ready to face them. As I settled into the rhythm of the mission, the radio crackled to life. My squadron's voices filtered through the static calm yet alert, each syllable carrying the weight of experience and urgency. Kovalenko left flank clear, one pilot reported. Another added, keep your altitude steady, approaching the ridgeline, potential visual contact. Every call was a lifeline, a connection that kept us coordinated and alive. I responded with clipped acknowledgments, my focus split between flying, scanning the horizon, and listening intently for any new developments. The brief moments of calm allowed for small exchanges that carried immense meaning. Good maneuver back there, my wingman's voice came through, and I felt a flicker of camaraderie, a reminder that we were in this together, bound by more than mission objectives. These voices grounded me, offering reassurance amidst the chaos, and underscored the unspoken pact we shared: watch each other's backs no matter what. Every successful maneuver reinforced trust and a sense of unity that could mean the difference between life and death. Between sorties, I managed brief communication with my family. A short, hurried message to my mother and sister contained little more than reassurances, though I could feel my heart pounding as I typed each word: safe, flying, thinking of you. Their replies, filled with concern and love, were precious, fleeting moments of normalcy in an otherwise surreal existence. I clung to them, storing the warmth and familiarity for the long hours that awaited in the cockpit. Even in these brief contacts, the reality of war pressed on me. Every call with squad mates reminded me of the stakes. Every message from home emphasized what was at risk. The air above Kiev was a constant reminder that lives my own, my fellow pilots, and those of civilians below depended on our vigilance and skill. I understood that communication was more than just coordination. It was a tether to humanity, a lifeline that connected duty with love, strategy with survival. By the time the mission ended and we returned to base, these voices, both in the radio and through digital messages, had anchored me. They reminded me of why I flew, who I fought for, and what I needed to survive. The first mission had been a baptism by fire, and through it I realized that trust, communication, and the connections we maintained were as critical as the instruments, the tactics, and the planes themselves. Back at the airbase, after the engines had cooled and the adrenaline had ebbed, I took a moment to sit alone in the quiet hangar. The first mission was behind me, yet its imprint lingered heavily on my mind. I replayed every maneuver, every decision, every call over the radio, analyzing what went well and what could have gone disastrously wrong. The reality of war had made itself unmistakably clear. Training prepared you, but nothing could fully replicate the unpredictability of combat. I felt a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and an unexpected surge of humility. Relief that I had returned safely, exhaustion from the physical and mental strain, and humility in realizing that the lives of countless civilians and my fellow pilots were intertwined with my actions, my choices, and my ability to stay alert in a sky filled with uncertainty. The weight of responsibility was tangible, a constant companion that would follow me into every future sortie. Yet, amidst the tension and fatigue, there was also a flicker of determination. I had survived, and with survival came knowledge, insight, and the growing confidence that I could endure the trials ahead. Each mission would demand more skill, sharper instincts, and deeper courage, but the first step had been taken. The city below, its streets now peaceful in the morning light, relied on us to maintain that fragile security. As I left the cockpit and walked back toward the barracks, I carried with me not only the technical lessons learned, but also a deeper understanding of what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself. The first mission had tested me, shaped me, and reminded me of the stakes at hand. The war was just beginning, and so was my journey through it. The morning was gray and oppressive, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the city below. Our squadron had been scrambled after radar detected multiple incoming aircraft along the northern corridor of Kiev. The briefing had been brisk: intercept, neutralize, and protect civilians at all costs. As I strapped into my cockpit, the reality of the mission sank in. This was no training simulation. This was war, and every second in the air could be the difference between life and death. Takeoff was tense but flawless, the engines roaring as the jet accelerated along the runway. Within minutes, the city had shrunk beneath us, a patchwork of streets, rooftops, and green spaces now vulnerable to the encroaching threat. The sky around us was thick with low clouds and drizzle, reducing visibility to mere hundreds of meters. Then the radar pinged enemy fighters approaching fast, outnumbering us nearly 2-1. The first engagement was immediate. I rolled into a tight turn, the G-forces pinning me to my seat as I locked onto a MiG, maneuvering aggressively to gain altitude. My wingman's voice crackled through the radio, precise and calm. Kovalenko left flank, clear adjust, heading 30 degrees. I responded, adjusting my roll and throttle, tracing the enemy's path with every calculation stored in my training. Every instinct I had honed in the simulators now demanded execution under intense pressure as missiles streaked past us in a deadly ballet. The battle became a blur of sound and motion. Engine hums, warning alarms, distant explosions, and the occasional crackle of gunfire filled the cockpit. I could see my comrades weaving through the clouds, executing maneuvers I had only practiced virtually, but now with flesh and bone at risk. Each decision had consequences: too slow, too late, and lives our own, and those below could be lost. I felt my chest tighten with adrenaline, a mixture of fear and exhilarating clarity sharpening my focus. Minutes or perhaps hours passed in a suspended rhythm of calculation and reaction. I dodged, climbed, and banked with precision, coordinating with the squadron through quick radio bursts. One enemy plane veered away after a near miss, another pressed, forcing a hair-raising evasive roll. I realized that survival in the air was as much mental as it was physical, anticipating the enemy, trusting my instruments, and never letting panic take hold. By the time the last intruder retreated, my arms ached from the constant tension on the controls, my body fatigued from the relentless G-forces. Yet there was a quiet triumph in knowing we had protected the city that morning. I glanced below at the rooftops glistening with rain, the streets untouched, and felt a solemn pride tempered with relief. The sky had tested me, and I had passed, but I knew this was only the beginning. More battles awaited, each demanding everything I had learned and everything I was yet to discover about fear, courage, and survival above Kiev. The roar of engines had barely faded when the first loss struck. One of our wingmen, Petrenko, a steady and reliable pilot I had trained alongside, was hit during a maneuver I had been watching from my position. I saw the plume of smoke curling from his tail as he struggled to maintain altitude. Time seemed to stretch every second, amplifying the helplessness I felt in the cockpit. I called out to him on the radio, voice tense. "Petrenko, do you copy?" Respond only static answered. My stomach tightened. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He was gone. Panic threatened to surge, but I forced it down. The battle was not over. Other enemy aircraft were still in the sky, and remaining calm was the only chance for survival. My squadron needed coordination, and I could not let grief dictate my actions. Still, the image of Petrenko spiraling down, smoke trailing behind him, etched itself into my mind. Every time I blinked, I could see it, and it would not fade easily. Another comrade, Ivan, barely escaped a missile that tore through the clouds nearby. I could hear the strain in his voice over the radio. "I've got shrapnel." Adjust course. I relayed evasive instructions, guiding him towards safety while fighting the weight of helplessness pressing on my chest. We were trained for combat, yet no drill had prepared us for the emotional impact of watching friends risk everything or worse fall. The rain-soaked sky and low clouds added to the chaos, obscuring vision and magnifying the danger. Debris from the engagement floated down like lethal confetti, a grim reminder of the stakes. I realized that each maneuver, each evasive roll carried not just my life, but the lives of those I flew alongside. The thought that I could survive while others did not clung to me, a bitter taste of survivor's guilt, I had yet to understand fully. By the end of the encounter, we had driven back the enemy, but the victory was hollow. Petrenko would not return, and Ivan, though alive, bore the physical and psychological scars of the engagement. The cockpit felt heavier, now burdened by the weight of loss and the knowledge that every mission could take someone away from me. In that moment, I understood that war was not merely about triumph or tactics. It was about enduring grief, making impossible choices, and finding the strength to continue flying when every instinct screamed to stop. The next moments came in a blur of noise, adrenaline, and searing pain. During a tight maneuver to intercept another enemy aircraft, debris from a near miss struck my canopy, shattering part of the glass. A jagged fragment grazed my arm, and the sudden sting was accompanied by a rush of panic. Blood ran warm along my sleeve, and for a split second I considered pulling back, retreating from the engagement. But the city below, the squadron beside me, and the mission itself would not allow hesitation. My first instinct was to stabilize the aircraft. The controls felt heavier under my hands, the cockpit vibrating from nearby explosions. I radioed in, voice tight with urgency. "Command, I've sustained minor damage. Requesting vector to nearest safe landing zone." Static crackled. Then the calm voice of the operations officer responded with precise instructions. I adjusted my heading throttling carefully to maintain altitude while keeping an eye on incoming threats. Every second was a balance between controlling the plane and managing the pain coursing through my arm. The emergency landing procedure replayed in my mind like a mantra from training. I went through each step, methodically deploy, landing, gear check, instruments, maintain communication with control, but the reality of blood, adrenaline, and fatigue made every action heavier, every decision a test of composure. My mind oscillated between fear and determination. I was acutely aware that a single mistake could turn the situation fatal. As I descended toward the makeshift landing strip, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. Pain was present, but so was resolve. Each second demanded total focus, maneuvering the aircraft with precision, judging wind currents, avoiding debris and obstacles. The cockpit instruments became extensions of my senses, guiding me while my body absorbed shock and strain. In that crucible, I realized that survival required both physical endurance and an unwavering mental discipline. Touchdown was rough but controlled. I exhaled, sharply gripping the controls until the jet came to a complete stop. Ground crews rushed forward, assessing damage and tending to my injuries. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what had occurred in the sky. The loss of friends, the chaos of battle, and the reality that each mission could be more dangerous than the last. I had survived, but the encounter left an indelible mark. Pain, fear, and responsibility intertwined, etching into my mind the true cost of life above the clouds in a war that spared no one. The city below spread out like a fragile mosaic, streets and rooftops glistening with rain. On my radar, an enemy aircraft maneuvered dangerously close to a residential district. The orders were clear: intercept. But as I lined up for the shot, the image of families, children, and unsuspecting civilians flashed in my mind. A single missile or burst of fire could devastate the area I had sworn to protect. The weight of responsibility pressed down harder than the G-forces ever could. I hesitated. Every second counted. My training dictated precision, speed, and execution, but my conscience screamed for caution. I spoke over the radio voice, steady but tense, command eye visual on hostile approaching civilian sector. Seeking authorization, static filled the cockpit for a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity. Then the calm response. Engage if necessary. Protect civilians at all costs. Necessary. The word reverberated in my mind. In war, necessity often came with unbearable cost. I adjusted my approach, calculating trajectory and potential collateral. The decision was split-second act and risk harm to innocents, or wait and risk allowing the enemy to strike. My heart pounded, adrenaline and fear interlacing with clarity. I reminded myself of the hours of simulation, the countless drills, and the unwavering mission objective. Lives hung in the balance, and hesitation could be fatal on both sides. I pulled the trigger, releasing the missile with precision, watching as it intercepted the hostile aircraft just shy of the densely populated area. Relief and horror washed over me simultaneously. The enemy neutralized civilians spared, but the moral weight was undeniable. In the aftermath, I felt an unshakable mixture of pride and guilt. I had done what was necessary, yet the memory of potential destruction lingered in every beat of my heart. In those moments, I understood a fundamental truth about aerial combat. It was not simply a contest of skill or technology. It was a test of ethics, judgment, and humanity under pressure. Every maneuver required thinking not only about survival, but also about the broader consequences of each action. War blurred the lines between duty and conscience, forcing choices that no simulation could ever prepare you for. That day above the rain-soaked streets of Kiev, I learned that courage was not the absence of doubt, but the resolve to act in spite of it. The sky over Kiev had transformed into a theater of chaos, a shifting expanse where danger lurked in every cloud and shadow. Thick gray clouds churned with rain, and distant explosions punctuated the roar of engines, artillery, and anti-aircraft fire. Visibility was limited with fog and smoke, intertwining in unpredictable patterns, making every maneuver a perilous gamble. The wind whipped across the fuselage, tugging at the aircraft with a strength that demanded constant correction, while my muscles burned from the relentless strain of G-forces. Below the city was a fragile landscape, streets, glistening wet rooftops scattered with debris, and occasional bursts of smoke rising from targeted zones. The hum of engines, the crack of distant ordnance, and the echoing alarms from anti-aircraft units created a constant auditory assault. Each sound demanded attention, each visual cue required rapid assessment. I had trained for emergencies, but the combination of sensory overload, fear, and responsibility for those beneath me created a new and intense reality. Inside, the cockpit instruments became both a lifeline and a source of stress. Every reading mattered. Altitude, airspeed, heading, and radar blips were vital for survival. My body reacted instinctively, hands tight on the controls, eyes scanning the horizon, mind calculating angles, velocities, and trajectories. The physical exertion was matched only by the mental load of anticipating enemy movements and civilian safety. The cockpit felt simultaneously confining and all-encompassing a personal arena, where skill and instinct merged with raw emotion. Despite the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. I could feel the rhythm of the air currents, the subtle shifts in wind that hinted at enemy positioning, and the distant vibrations from explosions that resonated through the fuselage. My senses sharpened, every nerve ending alert. The environment itself became a teacher, a relentless instructor demanding adaptability, focus, and endurance. There was no room for hesitation. Every second dictated life or death. As the engagement continued, fatigue settled into my muscles, yet I remained acutely aware of every threat. The physical and psychological pressures intertwined, creating a heightened state of awareness that was exhausting and exhilarating simultaneously. I realized that war was not a static battle. It was a constantly shifting landscape that demanded vigilance, resilience, and an acceptance of unpredictability. By the end of the sortie, my arms ached, my mind was drained, and yet I felt a profound respect for the sky that had tested me. It was unforgiving, lethal, and beautiful in its vastness. The war had shown me the fragile balance between life and death, skill and instinct, fear and courage. Above Kiev, I had glimpsed the full spectrum of aerial combat, understanding, for the first time, the immense physical and emotional toll it exacted on those who dared to defend the skies. The engines finally fell silent as I guided my jet back to base, the hum of the city below mingling with the ringing in my ears. The battle was over, but the sky still felt heavy with the echoes of what had occurred. I unbuckled from the cockpit, every muscle aching from the strain, and stepped onto the tarmac, breathing in the cool, damp air. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by a gnawing weight. The faces of comrades lost, the narrow escapes, and the chaos that had unfolded above Kiev. Petrenko was gone, a constant reminder of the fragility of life in the air. Ivan, though alive, carried visible scars and the invisible burden of near death. I could not erase the images from my mind, the smoke, the debris, the plumes of fire, and the frantic maneuvers that had saved or doomed lives in mere seconds. The exhilaration of surviving such an ordeal was inseparable from the sorrow and guilt that accompanied it. Victory in the skies did not erase the cost on the ground or in our hearts. As I debriefed with command, I relayed every detail, every near miss, and every tactical decision made in the heat of engagement. Each story was a piece of a puzzle that would help refine strategies and protect future missions. Yet in the quiet moments afterward, I reflected on the human element, the unpredictability, the fear, the courage. These were the aspects no simulation could teach, the lessons that only the crucible of combat could impart. Walking back to the barracks, I felt both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because I had survived, executed my duties, and contributed to protecting the city below. Heavier because war was not a series of isolated events. It was cumulative, leaving marks on body and soul alike. The first major battle had tested me in ways I could not have anticipated, shaping my understanding of courage, responsibility, and the price of survival. I knew the sky would call again, as it always would. Each sortie demanded more than skill, it demanded resolve, resilience, and the willingness to face fear without flinching. The lessons from this engagement would remain with me, forever etched into my muscles, my instincts, and my conscience. I was no longer simply a pilot. I was a participant in something far greater, a guardian of lives and a witness to the harsh truths of war. The moment my jet touched down on the tarmac, a heavy exhale seemed to escape my chest without conscious effort. The engines fell silent, leaving only the residual hum of distant machinery and the occasional shout from ground crew preparing for the next sortie. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered immediately by the weight of what had just occurred. The sky above Kiev had tested us, and not everyone had returned unscathed. I climbed down from the cockpit legs, unsteady from both fatigue and lingering adrenaline, and was met by the familiar faces of my squadron. Ivan, battered and bruised, gave a weak nod, a silent acknowledgement of survival and a reminder of those who had not made it. Petrenko's absence was a hollow space at the debriefing table, his empty seat, a stark illustration of the cost of war. I could still feel the echo of the smoke, the debris, the near misses, all imprinted on my mind as if tattooed by memory. Ground crews swarmed the jet, inspecting the fuselage for damage, while medics assessed my own minor injuries. I detailed the sequence of maneuvers, near escapes, and engagement results to command my voice calm but measured, recounting events with the precision drilled into me during training. Each word was weighed carefully, knowing that mistakes in the report could affect future operations or compromise the safety of others. Despite the technical debrief, my thoughts drifted repeatedly to the human element, the fear, the courage, the friends lost or injured. The battle had validated every hour of training, but it had also exposed the raw, unpredictable reality of aerial combat. No simulator or classroom briefing could replicate the tension of life and death decisions unfolding in real time, the constant judgment calls, or the emotional toll of witnessing destruction from the cockpit. As I walked toward the squadron barracks, the city below glimmered in the fading light, seemingly serene yet forever altered by the conflict. The weight of responsibility pressed against me, a constant reminder that each mission carried consequences far beyond my own survival. Today had tested not only my skill as a pilot, but also my resilience, composure, and humanity. The first wave had passed, but the war was far from over, and I would need to confront the physical and psychological consequences in the days ahead. In the hours following the mission, the physical toll of the battle settled heavily into my body. Every muscle ached from the constant G-forces, my shoulders and arms still trembling from the strain of maneuvering the aircraft in tight, violent turns. A dull, persistent throb radiated from the scratch on my arm, a small but constant reminder that I had been closer to death than I had ever imagined. Fatigue was overwhelming, yet sleep felt impossible. My mind replayed the dogfight over and over, a relentless montage of movement, danger, and split-second decisions. The psychological impact was far deeper and more insidious. Images of Petrenko spiraling from the sky, Ivan's panicked voice over the radio, and the debris scattered across the clouds haunted every thought. My heart would jump at the distant rumble of engines or even a dropped tool in the hangar, each sound triggering echoes of the engagement. The adrenaline that had kept me sharp in the air now mingled with anxiety, a restless energy that refused to dissipate. Flashbacks became frequent. I could see the smoke plumes feel the vibration of the fuselage under attack and hear the terrifying, disjointed cacophony of the battlefield. Nightmares arrived unbidden, replaying the mission with horrifying clarity, and I awoke in sweat, disoriented and tense. These were the invisible scars of combat psychological injuries, as real as the scratches and bruises my body bore. To cope, I sought solace in small routines, checking equipment, meticulously reviewing flight logs, and communicating with family whenever possible. Short messages to my mother and sister, though brief, grounded me, safe. Thinking of you. Their words returned comfort, a fleeting sense of normalcy that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the skies. Yet even these brief moments reminded me of the stakes. Every mission placed not only my life at risk, but the lives of those I loved and those I was sworn to protect. In reflection, I understood that surviving the battle was not just a matter of skill, it required mental resilience and emotional fortitude. Each sortie had stripped away a layer of innocence, replacing it with a sobering awareness of mortality, responsibility, and the fragile nature of life in wartime. The war had imprinted itself on me physically and psychologically, forging a resolve tempered by fear and the knowledge that every decision could carry irreversible consequences. The days following the first major engagement brought a new reality. Missions would no longer follow the predictable patterns of our initial patrols. Command had reassigned me to a series of high-priority sorties, each with objectives more complex and perilous than the last. The first involved escorting civilian transport helicopters through contested airspace, ensuring they reached safe zones without incident. Others required monitoring newly contested sectors or participating in coordinated strikes to prevent enemy advancement. The scope of responsibility had expanded, and with it, the stakes. Briefings became longer, more detailed, and more urgent. Intelligence reports highlighted shifts in enemy strategy formations were more aggressive, flight paths less predictable, and countermeasures increasingly sophisticated. I studied each report, meticulously analyzing radar patterns, weather conditions, and potential civilian risk. The lessons from my first combat sortie, both the maneuvers that had saved us and the mistakes that had endangered lives, became crucial in planning these missions. Every decision, every adjustment of altitude, heading, and speed now carried immediate consequences. The squadron dynamic shifted as well. I had to coordinate more closely with my wingmen, assigning roles not just for efficiency but for survival. Trust was no longer optional. It was the backbone of each operation. We ran through repeated simulations, rehearsing emergent scenarios, practicing evasive maneuvers under simulated fire, and refining communication protocols. Even minor errors could cascade into catastrophe, and the memory of Petrenko's loss served as a constant, sobering reminder. Yet amidst the increased responsibility and strategic complexity, there was also growth. I noticed subtle changes in my own decision-making. Where once hesitation might have lingered, instinct now moved more swiftly, guided by experience and careful reflection. The balance between risk and necessity became clearer, and the moral dimensions of each action, protecting civilians while neutralizing threats, became ever more acute. As I prepared for the next mission, I recognized that the war demanded adaptability, resilience, and a willingness to confront danger with clarity and discipline. The strategic shifts were not merely logistical. They were personal tests of endurance, judgment, and courage. Each flight would now require the full integration of physical skill, tactical understanding, and ethical awareness. The battles ahead would shape not only the course of the conflict, but the very essence of who I was becoming as a pilot and a protector of my city. The experiences of recent missions had begun to reshape not only my skills, but my understanding of what it meant to fly in wartime. Each sortie tested my physical endurance and technical ability, but it also challenged my perception of responsibility, courage, and the true cost of conflict. I had learned that skill alone was insufficient. Judgment, empathy, and resolve were equally critical in determining outcomes both in the air and on the ground. Watching civilians navigate the city streets below during operations underscored the fragility of life and the weight of our actions. Every decision I made carried consequences that extended far beyond the cockpit. The moral and ethical dimensions of combat became clearer. Protecting lives sometimes meant risking my own, and the survival of the squadron often required decisions that were both precise and humane. It was a delicate balance, one that forced me to reconcile duty with conscience repeatedly. Interactions with my fellow pilots provided further insight. Observing how seasoned aviators processed fear, loss, and responsibility taught me that courage was not the absence of doubt, but the ability to act in spite of it. We shared stories of near misses, losses, and lessons learned, and in these exchanges I found guidance, reassurance, and a sense of solidarity. The bonds formed under extreme conditions became anchors in a world otherwise defined by chaos. Physically, I had adapted to the relentless demands of aerial combat, my reflexes sharper, my endurance greater, and my awareness of both aircraft and environment heightened. Psychologically, the trauma and stress were tempered by experience and deliberate reflection, enabling me to approach each mission with a clearer mind and a steadier hand. Ultimately, I recognized that personal growth in war was inseparable from the context of struggle. The challenges, losses, and ethical dilemmas had forced me to confront vulnerabilities I had not previously acknowledged. Andriy Kovalenko, the boy who once dreamed of flight for the joy of soaring above Kiev, had evolved into a pilot who understood the gravity of protecting a city, the fragility of life, and the profound responsibility carried by those entrusted with its defense. The air above Kiev was no longer just a realm of adventure. It had become a crucible for character, courage, and conscience. As the days passed, the lessons of previous engagements became a compass for the missions ahead. Each aircraft inspection, weapons check, and flight briefing was approached with renewed focus. The weight of responsibility, once abstract, had become tangible. Every detail mattered, from fuel levels and radar calibration to the readiness of my squadron mates. A single oversight could compromise not only the mission, but the lives of those we were sworn to protect. Training exercises intensified, incorporating the unpredictable elements we had encountered in real combat. Simulations now included variable weather, hostile maneuvers, and emergency protocols for civilian-heavy zones. I worked closely with my wingmen, refining coordination, communication, and tactical responses. Trust and precision had become as critical as reflexes and skill. We were no longer individual pilots, but an interdependent unit, each member's performance directly affecting the others. Mentally, I fortified myself with reflection and preparation. I reviewed mission plans, repeatedly visualized potential scenarios, and rehearsed split-second decisions in my mind. The specter of loss and the weight of prior experiences were never far yet. They became tools for vigilance rather than sources of paralysis. I reminded myself constantly why I flew: to protect the city, to honor the memory of fallen comrades, and to uphold the fragile hope resting in the skies above. By the time the next mission was called, I was ready, physically tempered by endurance, mentally sharpened by experience, and emotionally anchored by purpose. The storms, both literal and metaphorical, awaited, but I felt a quiet resolve. The air above Kiev was no longer just a space to navigate. It had become a crucible in which skill, courage, and conscience were tested together. Every mission from this point forward would demand everything I had learned, and I was determined to meet that challenge with unwavering focus and resolve. The final missions were a mixture of relief and tension. Kiev's skies were quieter than they had been in weeks, enemy aircraft activity diminishing, as the front lines shifted and strategic priorities changed. Flying over the familiar streets one last time, I took in the city from above its rooftops, glistening in the morning sun, streets slowly returning to routine. The tension that had gripped every sortie seemed to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of calm. Returning to base after the last mission, I felt an unusual weight lift from my shoulders. The jet touched down with a gentle rumble, and I unstrapped myself from the cockpit for what I knew might be the final time. My comrades greeted me with nods and quiet smiles, relief mirrored in every face. Yet the shadows of those who did not make it remained. Petrenko's absence was still keenly felt, as was the unspoken acknowledgement of the sacrifices etched into each one of us. The city was momentarily safe, and we had played our part, but survival had come with its own cost. Walking through the base, the air felt different, not just quieter, but heavy with reflection. I replayed missions in my mind, the dogfights, the evasive maneuvers, the moments when split-second decisions saved lives. Each memory carried a dual-weight pride in the work accomplished, sorrow for the losses endured. I had survived, yes, but the scars, visible and invisible, reminded me that every mission had exacted its toll. Even after the engines cooled and the adrenaline faded, the war left its imprint on me. My body ached from months of relentless sorties. Minor injuries had healed physically, but were etched into memory, each twinge a reminder of near disasters. Nights were the hardest. Sleep was interrupted by vivid recollections, smoke trailing from downed aircraft alarms, ringing the terror and bravery of comrades. The PTSD was subtle but persistent flashbacks, arrived unbidden, triggered by distant noises or sudden movements. The psychological wounds were as real as any physical scar. Yet, in these shadows, I found growth. I had learned to channel fear into focus, uncertainty into calculated action. I understood now the fragility of life, the weight of responsibility, and the value of every heartbeat in the cockpit. Every loss, every close call, and every successful mission shaped my awareness, hardening resolve while deepening empathy. War had taken much, but it had also illuminated the depth of courage, both in myself and those around me. Reflecting on the months above Kiev, I understood the full measure of what it meant to fly in wartime. Each mission was more than a test of skill. It was a commitment to protect lives, to honor the sacrifices of friends lost, and to uphold the fragile hope of civilians below. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The sky had been both adversary and teacher, and in its expanse I had discovered the essence of responsibility, leadership, and human resilience. The memories of those lost missions that went perfectly, and those that did not, would stay with me forever. They served as reminders that peace is precious, fragile, and worth defending. The camaraderie of my squadron, the bravery of civilians enduring uncertainty, and the lessons carved into the skies would guide me long after the engine stopped roaring. In every reflection, I found purpose, the value of sacrifice, the dignity in duty, and the enduring power of memory. As I looked once more at the skyline of Kiev, the city awake and alive below me, I realized that the war had changed everything. The air I breathed, the weight in my chest, the memories of the sky, it was all a testament to survival, courage, and responsibility. Conflict had taught me that life is measured not only by victories, but by the lives we protect, the sacrifices we endure, and the legacy we carry forward. The skies were quiet now, but the lessons of flight, battle, and conscience would echo within me forever, a reminder that even amidst destruction, humanity and the hope for peace could endure.